happening with it. Who else is it? Mary Davis and Maurice Glassman, isn't it? That's not just really.
Yeah, Mary Davis is doing she's speaking on behalf of the Communist Party. Maurice Glassman is Labour, but he's supposedly...
Yeah, the Blue Labour, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a Labour peer, actually. Yeah. And then we're expecting somebody from the Greek Communist Party. I don't know, they said they would send somebody.
I saw a couple of them outside. I saw a couple of bridges from the takeaway outside.
Yeah?
Alright,
okay.
So they're here and there.
See, Kukwe, Greece has got a Kukwe representative in is a member of the European Parliament.
I think it's two.
Two,
yeah. The fella who used to do the national relations for their youth section is one of them.
Yeah. Hey, hello Kostas. Nice to see you.
Καλώς ήρθες. Γιατί ήταν αυτό μαζί.
Έπρεπε να του
today. What time?
I called because I am going. How are you?
Hello Andreas.
Yes.
Hello. Good to see you. Andreas.
Να γράψει κάτω
He's famous.
Την πρώτη να λείπω και εγώ.
Why is he famous?
Να λείπω και εγώ. 19 να μπορέσω να κάνω, αλλά 12 να πρέπει να το είπες, εδάφερτο του Πάμπολος που να δάμε στις ζωές. Ένας που τους πιο, απλά ο Πάμπολος επειδή έχει το καινούριο σημαντισμό, αν μπορώ να κάνω.
How are you?
I'm all the better for seeing you, Andreas.
Are you happy to see me?
Of course I'm happy to see you. Yes, τι κάνεις?
Listen to me. Έλα σου πω κάτι. Προσπαθώ για να γίνω μέλος, δεν τα κατάφερα ακόμα. Θυμάμαι μου έστειλες the papers, okay, the forms.
What happened to them?
I got them at home. So
how long does it take, Andrea?
It's just sort of so many other things. So definitely I will do it this week. Okay, before I
call. Treats me like a child.
No, you're a lovely girl. Okay, so.
I don't believe you.
Costas is my witness. It will maybe tomorrow or the day after we fill up the form and send them and I will send them a check.
Ooh, very good.
Yes. Okay.
That would be good.
Yes.
Do it then now.
I will.
Don't talk about it.
Costas,
it's taken a year.
We don't talk about it.
I'm facing everything. I like that.
I think he beginning to go dimension. Costas is going to be.
But you're forgetting as well. It's taken you a year to do the form.
No, I'm not forgetting. I'm so bloody busy. But I'm going to be honest with you and find out the bloody excuses not to do it. But definitely the next 2 weeks I will do it. Okay?
Shall I ring you?
Before leaving.
I'm going away on Saturday.
This Saturday?
I'm going away to Cyprus for 2 weeks.
Okay.
So, and I only I'm leaving on Saturday very early in the morning. I will try to do that
before Saturday?
Yeah, I try to do it before Saturday. Or otherwise, as soon as I come back, I do it. I got the forms.
Yeah.
You're away for 2 weeks from Saturday?
Yes.
If you've got people you want me to send a live stream to,
what do you do?
Emails.
You're off, Thomas.
They do?
Alright.
You're on to?
You're off, Thomas.
Yeah.
That's Anglia.
Sean Paul.
Επίεννα εγώ κάτω επειδή είχαν πολλά θέματα που πρέπει να εξετάσεις, πρέπει να κάνεις όλα τα πράγματα.
60-40 ends convincing enough.
64 in favour of net.
Yeah.
Ξερούχα.
9,000 to 6,000. It's about 20% turnout.
Η ώρα 3,5 πρέπει να είμαι αεροδρόμιο. Επέτουν η ώρα 5,5.
Last time was about 25, but that was national news last time. It was when Barbara died, so...
Κάτσα η ώρα 8,5 το πρωί Χίπτρο. Τόση ώρα 10 να πω γραφή.
I mean, people from the branch will be here. So, what about people like Robert Griffiths and people like that?
Καλά.
Yeah. I mean, I've got his email, I can do that.
Yeah, Robert Griffiths. Bill Greenshields. Do you have Bill Greenshields? Sorry. Yeah.
I've got the wrong glasses.
Evans Richard.
Άστε καλά ρε, άστε καλά, χτύπα ξύλο. Στην Κύπρο. Στην Κύπρο βάλουν κόντρα με τα κάτω ποιος έχει χειρότερα. Στην Κύπρο βάλουν κόντρα με τα κάτω ποιος έχει χειρότερα. Αφού δεις την κυβέρνησή μας, εγώ πειράζω στην Κύπρο, δεν μπορείτε εσείς να λαλείτε ότι μπορείτε να σου. Αν μιλήσει κανένας άλλος, να μιλήσετε εσείς λάθος. Αν μιλήσουμε εμείς, μάλλον όχι εσείς, να μιλήσουμε εμείς, άνθρωποι, ευκάλαν του κάτι σκάνδαλα τώρα, τίποτα. Άρα μην πάσει, ούτε που σημαίνει. Σκέψτε να φτιάχνουμε τα κάτω ότι το δικηγορικό γραφείο του Προέδρου έκαμε ξέπλυμα πρόμοιου χρήματος για εκατομμύρια. Το ίδιο. Ναι, μα μιλούμε τώρα να βγει international οίκος ερευνητικός του τύπου που κάνουν τα Panama Papers. Η ίδια οργάνωση έφκαλε προς τα έξω ότι είναι ένα πράγμα. Ότι εντός που έκαμε με τον πιο Ρώσα Μεγιστάν, το γραφείο του. Άρα λίγα μας παίζει. Ναι. Και ευκάλαν προς τα έξω τις διαδρομές των χρημάτων, τα transaction. Και κανένας δεν μοίρα, ούτε καν οι εφημερίδες δεν το γράψαν. Μόνο οι χαλακοί το γράψαν. Φοβούνται, επειδή εκείνος τους τράει στον νόμος. Αφού για τους ρέντε καθαρά τα ίδιους ούλους. Μες στο προεδρικό τώρα εργάζονται 35 δημοσιογράφοι. Ο καθένας τους για να κάνει κοντρόλ ένα μας μήνυμα. Και τώρα αναγκάζονται να πιέσει άλλους. Εκλογές είσαι σε 3 χρόνια, 3,5. Και όπου να ζεις. Μαντζέρα, μα γι' αυτό μόνο ότι εμείς φταίμε. Ναι, αρέσκει. Ξέρω, τα πολλές που είδαμε. Τα και έκανα και εκδηλώσεις δάμε. Είχε άλλη μια φορά που μου αμυντικής που λέγαμε, αλλά ένα άλλη που το οργάνωνα ήταν η συντροφή που το οργάνωνα στους ίδιους.
Ναι.
Another one is Benchaco. Benchaco. Hello.
Got Benchaco and this guy who's got
John Foster.
John Foster.
Yeah.
So it's Foster.
John Foster.
Εμάς το μόνο μας έτσι αφορά τώρα μας μένει σε αυτό το ναι.
Officially, ναι. Να κάτω, έχει μια ιδιαιτερότητα. Επειδή περάσαμε και την περίοδο που ήμασταν, είδαμε, ύστερα κάναμε ένα άνοιγμα στον κόσμο που έμεινε στο κομμουνιστικό κόμμα και ήρθαν πολλά θέλει να έρθει και στα. Δεν υπάρχει. Τα κάτω έχουμε, υπάρχουν και άλλοι που μέλη στα. Το ζήτημα είναι ότι τούτοι, που πλευράς τους τούτους, αν το μάθουν, μπορεί να κάνουν πρόβλημα.
Αν μάθουν ποιοι?
Όχι, οι Εγγλέζοι. Δεν ξέρω αν είναι ok με το ότι είσαστε και άλλο μέρο. Ότι είσαστε και άλλο στο Άγιο. Δεν είμαι σίγουρος.
Εγώ είμαι σίγουρος.
Οκ, εσύ ξέρεις καλύτερα.
Είναι και παύλα όλα.
Εγώ μπορώ να σου πω, εγώ μιλώ για τα κομμάτια που ξέρω. Άμα για κάτι δεν ξέρω, δεν μπορώ να μιλώ σίγουρα. Εσύ ξέρεις το λόγο είναι. Εγώ μιλώ για τα κομμάτια που ξέρω το κομμάτι. Καλά εκείνο που είναι δουλειά. Για εκείνα που δεν ξέρω.
Εσύ το ξέρω που σε έχεις στην Αγγλία.
Κοίτα, δεν υπάρχουν ποτέ επίσημα γραμμένα. Δεν ξέρω. Δεν υπάρχει.
Ποτέ δεν υπάρχει.
Α, ναι, βρίσκεται. Πηγαίνει.
Εγώ τον ξέρω και με Σαρίδη. Αντρέα Σαρίδη.
Εγώ λέω ότι όταν ζήτησα εγώ επίσημη ενημέρωση τώρα, μου είπα ότι κάθε περίπτωση.
Ο Χαμπής Μιχαήλ, μάλλον ο Πεύκος, ο Γιώργος Πεύκος, ήταν ο πρώτος, ο ανάλαβος, διευθυντής.
Ξέρω ιστορία του.
Ξέρεις τι. Είναι πεθρός του...
Ήμουν εχθές μαζί με τον Κύπρο τον Πεύκο. Ήμουν προχτές μαζί με τον Κύπρο τον Πεύκο.
Ναι, είναι ο πατέρας.
Ξέρω.
Και ήταν μετά ο Χαμπής Μιχαήλ. Κάναμε συνεδριάσεις και είπαμε ότι μεταφερόμενοι στα αγγλικά, ενώ Κυπρέοι δεν ξέραν αγγλικά. Και αποφασίσαμε να κάνουμε συνεδριάζουμε στα ελληνικά. Υπήρχε ακόμα περίπτωση που να χωρίσουμε.
Είχε διάφορα.
Όλα αρέσει. Εσύ την Δευτέρα στο πηγό Παρίσου.
Και κάτω που για μια άλλη φορά.
Ναι.
Πέρα να είμαι εκτός πάλι. Δεν έκατσα ακόμα. Και μπορείς να κάτσω την επόμενη εβδομάδα. Πώς το, να κάτσω. Και αβάδια, πώς το, έρεξε ούτε το καλοκαίρι και καταλύσαμε την...
Ο Αντωνιάδης ή να πού είναι.
Καλά, ήρθε σήμερα από εκεί.
Ήρθε σχέδιο πω.
Για να κουρεί μακρά για λόγια. Για είστε περιοχές και πάνω που νιώθει πιο άνετα γίνεται με το αυτοκίνητο.
Κιάσε παραπάνω.
Όχι, είναι εύκολο.
Κιάσε πιο.
Είμαι φίλος τους εννοώ.
Κιάσε.
Πότε το
Ο λόγος της ρώτησας, είχα μια κάπως που ήταν το σχολείο. Έρχονταν και κάπου τις σκέφτονες στο μάτι μου το κουκουέ. Στο σχολείο, ήταν 3 εβδομάδες και μια γυναίκα. Είχε μια Ελληνίδα και δεν μου έκανε τις χάρμας. Μου ρώτησε, εσύ είστε σήμερα. Δεν με νοιάζει να γίνω εντύπωση είμαστε σε άλλο
Ένα, σε ένα.
δεν είναι να πει εδώ.
Δεν είδα κανένα, δεν προλάβα το κανένα.
Τίποτε έρχονται.
Με ένα θύμα να μου γιατί. Μόνο με εσύ πες πάνω στην περιοχή.
Από το 1956 νομίζω στο Βунζόν. Μόλις επάλεσα το που ήμουν στην Αγγλία. Μάλλον ήταν οι κομμουνιστικές ομάδες.
Κυπρίο. Δεν να έχει πρόβλημα. Δεν να προβάλλει μισό.
Θα προβάλλουν.
Όχι, είναι κάμερα για να πιάσει συζήτηση. Και προλεπτέρ, κάμερα.
Όχι, δεν μπορεί να σε φύγει.
Δεν ξέρω.
Ναι, δεν μπορεί να σε φύγει.
Δεν το ξέρω.
No, it's been a few years since then.
Yeah, I mean, they've had children and all. How many have you got now?
2. 5-year-old and 3-year-old. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Αν δεν κολλήσω,
Yeah, I wouldn't think
You
so.
still want to go on too?
Yeah, yeah. It's just a bit there. It's alright, sure. He's arrived, he's outside. They had a meeting upstairs the day before.
Who?
Mark's library or something like that.
Where are you going to sit?
I don't think so, because I'm the secretary.
Okay.
I hope not. Didn't meet with her. He's very fast. Who's sitting there? Is that Mary?
That's Mary, yeah.
I'll sit on the end.
Shall I sit there next to Andreas and you sit here next to me?
Oh, whatever you say.
Oh, there's Jonathan. Who's famous? Who? The famous? Andreas. Is he famous? Why is he famous? I'm asked him and he hasn't answered the question. This is Andreas. Andreas is famous. But I don't know why. Do you know why? Don't
Everyone knows that's what I understood. But I don't know why, but everyone knows.
Maybe it's because he's a communist. Possibly.
Could be.
I belong to all these two organizations. I'm in the Greek school and the SECA and the many other things. So
Very
I'm
active.
part of the schools for the last 45
Thought this would be a couple hours.
Yes.
So you're famous?
Don't know. No, I would think. I mean, there's 2, 4, 5 speakers. Oh no, there's a Akel bloke. Morris, who should be here. I must just check he's on his
Is
way.
that a reason to be famous?
It's about 10 minutes each, is it?
I just try
knows
to
a
go
lot.
alone. Yeah.
He knows a lot of people, that's what it means. Thank you so much, Andreas.
Oh, thank you very much. That'll stop me speaking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just had one. No,
You can do without.
I had one.
Oh, that's just something to know.
that's me up again. Yeah.
I know the trick. I know the trick.
Police is for the many, not the few.
Yes, exactly. That's the slogan. Hi, you're on your way? Oh, good. Lovely. See you. Bye.
So we've got 2 speakers missing.
He's coming. He's on.
And then
Is it Farrington now?
The Greek.
Who?
The Greek. Kukwe.
He's just outside.
Hmm?
That's outside.
Is he outside?
He's having a cigarette, yeah.
Oh, he's having a fag. Is he?
He's what?
He's having a
cigarette.
fag.
He's having what?
A fag.
Oh, he's here.
So everybody, because I don't know his name, I need to get his name. Panos, I think. Panos something. You know him? What's his surname? Pass.
I thought this would be packed out. It might be actually. I thought they'd be. In fact, is he a huge group outside? Is he one of them?
Merula.
Yeah, there's 5 or 6.
Yeah, right. There's loads of them.
Εγώ, είμαι Μερούλα. Δεν είμαι τόσο μικρή τώρα. It's a fresh community.
Yes.
He's from?
Yeah.
From Cyprus?
No. Greece.
From Greece? Kukwe. It's the Kukwe delegation.
Yeah, that's right. I thought it might be the case. They're all outside.
There's Alex.
We met a Chinese she's a really communist and she talked about it and at the beginning she told us so many things and she sent a picture of us to her dad in China, and she said, I don't believe she said there is a communist in the middle of the capitalist country. So I said,
A few here, anyway. A few here.
Ah, Pandeli's his name.
I thought it would be standing room only, but it might be. No, Tassos, Mary. Another Mary. Two Marys.
Are you
I'm
our...
Tassos from KKE.
Yeah.
Welcome. Tassos. What's your surname? How do I introduce you?
Mangelis.
Tassos Mangelis.
Mangelis, yes.
Join us.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much.
I don't think this is my pen. It's a very nice pen. Tassos, do you mind
Hi.
going first?
Oh, no.
I thought if you go first, and then Andreas, and then Mick, and then our Labour Party speaker, and then Mary. Is that okay? And you know, I'm going to be very strict. 7 minutes. I start telling you.
Very
Yeah. 10 minutes max.
And she is strict, really.
10 minutes.
It's a very, very strong issue for 7 minutes, to be honest.
I know, well, I find the same. I think we all do. And since it's all happening,
Well, it's maybe I'll manage.
I think we'll manage. Get 3 pages.
There's two solutions. Either you cut or you speak quickly.
If I speak quickly, I'm afraid nobody will understand me because I have this Greek accent, which is not easy for the rest.
It's very nice, the Greek accent.
my Chinese friend tomorrow.
Is your Chinese friend? Is she?
She brings me so many things from China. Her father, her grandfather carried to bring to me, so not that a lot of things from China about the communist party.
It's filling up.
Yeah, I think it will be. We'll wait for he'll be here in a minute, so we'll wait for him.
Oh, yeah, we'll give it 5 minutes. Yeah. Absolutely. What's going on? Somebody's getting strangled at the door. Chris is live streaming it. Is there anybody you want him to live stream it to? In Akel? No. Tassos, Chris is going to live stream the meeting. Is there anybody in Kukue you want him to live stream it to?
Right now, I'm afraid not.
You're okay. And Mick? You're okay.
I think so. It'll be okay. Thank you.
Oh, my children.
My grandchildren.
My grandchildren.
The younger the better.
I wonder if that woman from the
Gemma.
store, yeah,
Yes.
but because she's got no internet, she might not have been able to find it. The modest party turn, isn't it? Did you have your branch committee?
Yeah.
I rang you because I was worried about who would let you in. Who did let you in?
Andy.
Andy Bell.
I think Chris was on. No, it was quite good turning.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Steve was there, Andrew. Laura. Ruth.
Oh,
Anfield, Simon.
yeah.
Alex. Costas, he's from Oxford.
Which one?
These two conways are from North London.
Oh, are they? Oh, they've come because there's
Because of Akel.
No.
no.
Jonathan is here. He doesn't use a cup. Jonathan is here. He doesn't use a cup.
Okay. So they're both in your branch, the two Greek comrades.
He's the Akel member. Yeah.
But they're members of Northampton?
Yeah, they live very near me actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in my the northwest suburb of London.
Caroline, did you mention Caroline? Caroline? I thought Sue would be here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Isn't it? Caroline came because she's on the committee.
Yeah. Who else is on the committee?
Andy, Chris Reeves, Robert,
Oh, we haven't.
and we had an apology. Who was it? Apology.
I think Robert's amazing, actually.
I think he's
I don't,
amazing.
what the spectrum thing, I can't see any indication of it. Can you? But you're the one who said it.
I wasn't.
Hello, Maurice. Welcome. I'm Mary Adesides.
My magic
Andreas Gregor.
Andreas.
Okay.
Gregor.
You want me to sit, Mary?
There.
Are you okay there?
I'm very happy.
Zedek and Nidra.
So should we start?
Is that amplified
Everybody's
or
on?
is it that's just for the
I
camera?
think
Is
we
it?
should start.
Yeah, but that's not for speaking into it. But we don't. But
Okay, comrades.
yeah.
Comrades.
You stay.
We're going to start. We've got our panel of speakers. They've all arrived, so it's nice to have you here. Welcome, first of all, to our meeting organised by the London Communist Party and the North London branch of the Communist Party. We're living in momentous times, and this meeting is bang on to start off the season where we're going to see every week developments, unexpected developments, or we will see. But I don't want to speak long because we've got quite an interesting panel. We've got, first of all, our international speakers, and I'm going to start by asking Tassos Mangelis from the KUKUE, the Greek Communist Party, to kick off. And then I'm going to ask Andreas Grigoriou from the Akel Communist Party of Cyprus. And very pleased to have Mick Carty with us, who's the General Secretary of the Conley Association, to give us an idea of what's going on in Ireland. And then we've got Maurice Glassman, who is from the Labour Party and who will... but who's a supporter of Leave, so I think the angle will be different. And finally, Professor Mary Davies is here, will speak on behalf of the Communist Party. Each speaker has going to be under strict instructions to speak for 7 to 10 minutes max, in order that we can hear everybody and to have a good discussion, and then a summary, and then a few announcements. So I'm going to start by inviting Tassos to start.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take it as fast as I can. So, dear comrades, dear friends, the KUKUE would like to thank, first of all, CPB for organizing this meeting and for inviting us as part of the discussion, especially under these very tense developments regarding Brexit. The matter of analyzing European Union is of vital importance for all communists and progressive parties, as it affects literally all strategic aspects of the economy of European countries. But it also characterizes the strategies deployed by the European capital within borders as well as on a global level. European and parliamentary elections conducted in Greece this year record a new status between the bourgeois parties, characterized by the governmental alteration between the left Syriza and the right-wing party New Democracy, expressing the differences in strategies of the monopolies of EU and of NATO. This government alteration reflects objectives and requirements of the ruling class for a better planned intervention, a need for greater stability and effectiveness in front of potential future dangers. These dangers mostly arrive from the weak economic recovery and from the sharper imperialist antagonisms which are raging in our region and beyond. Despite the correlation against class forces remaining negative, many workers have voted for the main bourgeois parties without expectations for any positive changes in their lives. These workers stand now closer to KUKUE. They are following our positions, even if they have not been persuaded to take a more decisive step. These are all a serious legacy for the people, but also a responsibility for the KUKUE. to become a more powerful springboard for the labor popular movement lines. This will also prove of vital importance if Greece will face an escalating situation in the region. Oh, that's me, it's
That's
ironic.
you.
I thought I had it.
Take it off his time.
Take your time, it's all right.
No, take it off his time.
Sorry, I had So where was I? Sorry about that. So yes, this will also prove of vital importance if Greece will face an escalated situation in the region, regardless if this concerns a warm incident or a generalized collision. I'm referring, of course, to the sharpening of the economical and geopolitical rivalries in the field of energy and oils in the East Mediterranean. The stigma of this escalation is still given by the threats and challenges of Turkey, which messages in every direction the intention to defend its own energy and geopolitical designs. The recent events regarding ExxonMobil's of US interests is characteristic of the competition that takes place in Bloc 10 in Cyprus, baffling the people of Cyprus and Greece in very dangerous bazaars, all under the supervision of NATO. Our party has a long-standing opinion regarding EU and its character, an opinion which emerges not only from studying EU strategy, but also from analyzing the devastating effects this brings upon Greek people. We believe that the stance of the communists towards the European Union must be determined on the basis of its imperialistic character. EU was founded solely as an association of capitalist states, expressing the interests of their monopolies, but also realizes their competing interests with the monopolies against the monopolies of the US, of China, Russia, and other capitalist states. Its anti-popular directions and mechanisms express the strategic decisions of the European capital at the political and economical level, including privatization, demolition of labor and social interest rights, tax evasions, cuts in state social policy spending, applied to all member states to shield their competitiveness of business groups. EU cannot therefore be democratized or transformed into a progressive workers' Europe. Militarization is also enhanced by the establishment of PESCO, the cell of the Euro army, as well as repression, monitoring and surveillance, while the complex reactionary mechanisms multiply at the expense of the people. A very strong point of KKE's opposition to EU is the Union's relations with NATO. These relations are far from smooth, complex and many times contradictory, especially between USA and leading European countries in matters such as military arming and imperialistic invasions. But, at the same time, via the Declaration of Prague and Warsaw meeting, EU and NATO cooperation was strengthened based on mutual strategic interests, aiming to promote peace and stability, as they say, in the Euro-Atlantic area. The policy of the EU and the governments of the member states, their allies including those of NATO, also causes and multiplies the refugee problem, literally capturing thousands of refugees, even unsupervised children as we speak, in the concentration camps on the Greek islands and mainland. In addition, EU is the leading anti-communist mechanism in all member states, trying to rewrite history but also impose the ludicrous and very dangerous propaganda of equalizing communism and fascism. From the anti-communist memorandum of EU in 2005 to the declaration of 23rd of August as a memorial day of victims of Nazi and Stalinism, and many more, they have a systematic effort of rewriting history. Such an effort, funded with hundreds of millions of euro and heavily focused on Stalin and the Soviet Union, targets not so much on the past but mainly on the future, so that the communist ideology and action would be stigmatized, especially from our youth, as one of the most effective ways to stop any development for the workers' movement. In the UK, Brexit have put a huge pressure on workers' movement and the people. We observe a clash of titans, if I might say, between certain parts of the UK capital and their representatives, mainly within the two major political parties. They are right those who today criticize European Union, the European Central Bank policies. But this criticism is not functional if it's not accompanied with the goal of the socialization of monopolies, since only combined can an exit from the EU guarantee that there will be a financial growth for the benefit of the people? It is not effective to defend the exit option, but within the capitalist development road. This option currently flirts with parts of capital in the UK which are expecting higher profits from a Brexit. All those political forces that propose such a target as a solution or as an intermediate target for radical changes inevitably play the game of parts of the capital, dragging the Labour popular movement behind the bourgeois party. It is one thing that people choose the same themselves an exit from EU with their will and action, taking simultaneously the keys of the economy and power in their hands, and a completely different thing to take a place outside the Eurozone, resulting in contradictions and antagonisms of the capitalist. The first alternative is to benefit the people and worth every sacrifice. The second leads to a popular bankruptcy and by another road. Overall, evidence shows that EU has not been able to satisfy the contemporary needs of the people. But within its member states, people are facing very sharpened, very chronic problems. The unequal growth is widening, even within the European leading core that has been operating for years to the benefit of Germany. Contradictions are intensifying, and Brexit is a prime example for this. The different proposals for the future of the EU, the clusters within it, reflect the confrontation of bourgeois governments to safeguard the interests of their national monopolies. Today, a truly progressive strategy can only link the struggle for disengagement from the EU with a struggle for the overthrow of the capital power in each country, for social ownership and central planning with Labour people's participation in the governing. Many states are not members of the EU. Many bourgeois governments of all shades have tried one or the other management version, but the common denominator in all these continents, in all our continents, is the accumulation of wealth on the one hand and the poverty on the other, the maintenance of human exploitation by men. It is only the struggle for socialism and not a currency change or an imperialistic alliance within capitalism that will give better days to our people. Workers of the world unite. Thank you very much.
Well, that was very timely. Well done. 7 minutes.
I could feel the pressure.
Well, this is from Kukwe and the situation in Greece and austerity in Greece. And now I'm going to invite Andreas Gregoriou from AKEL to tell us about Cyprus in 7 minutes.
First of all, again, I would like to thank for the invitation with such an interesting
Panel.
The timeless view of AKEL about the character of the EU as a promoted organization of capitalist integration, it is confirmed every day through the processes which are deepening EU integration. In a road where the sovereignty of states and people is being limited drastically and transferred in a more reactive level of the EU power. Without a doubt, as AKEL, we believe that the current European unification is very far removed from its own proclamation and first and foremost from the expectation and the needs of people of the EU states member. When during the mid-90s AKEL decided under precondition and having the cause of the Cyprus problem at heart to consent to Cyprus accession to the EU, it declared that it was as a result of the drastic change in the international condition and not a change in the EU's character. At that time, the views and warning issued by AKEL and a big part of the left in Europe about the capitalist nature were ignored by most. Today, however, it is evidently that the views and warning were beside them. Step by step, many of those have been mentioned by the speaker before me on the refugee and immigrant issue. How do the EU's proclaimed values apply when the principle of solidarity are replaced by the dogma of the fortress of Europe? On the foreign policy and defense issue, how can the EU be the force of peace as it is claiming that it is proceeding in a shifting investment towards the wars and army industry when continuously is deepening the coupling with NATO? The democratic functioning, transparency and sustainability, equality between the member states within the EU structure represent one of the most discussed European issues In our view, it is a structural issue. The EU has a class character, given that the elites and powerful interests dominate the terms of people, citizens, trade unions, and movement. Someone might respond that it's not possible not to acknowledge, beside all those points, that EU has positive achievement to show, maybe on environmental issues or against discrimination. Indeed, there are some elements that it can be the comparison between EU and other states, it will be there. Nevertheless, the economic policy that they have dominates have annulled in people's day-to-day life and in practice such achievement and gains, which until recently we consider as given, when, for example, since unemployment and poverty are rising sharply, women's and other social groups are being discriminated against, are doubly affected. Same stands for environment. The laws just in theory, not in practice. Austerity and memorandum have shown the real nature of the system. People driven in poverty, attack on workers' rights, shrinking the public sector, decomposing the social state, human rights under attack. In EU, Euro and Financial Monetary Union are the exact tools that deepening and institutionalizing those policies. Lisbon Treaty was based on Maastricht Treaty and included Stability and Growth Pact. It has institutionalized neoliberalism, bringing austerity and forbidding the states to apply their own financial policy, including nowadays taxing policy. Members have lost a big part of their sovereignty. Specifically for Cyprus, we are talking about a small extrovert economy, integral part of the global capitalist system. A country lucky enough to have the most progressive government on its history during the first year of the global economic crisis of capitalism. Between 2008 2015, we have enhanced the state social character within the existing system, solve water problem, resolve the social insurance funding sustainability, develop a satisfactory public transport system, educational reform was promoted, general health system was were accelerated, integrate housing policy, doubling the funding about housing, benefits for vulnerable groups were increased, minimum wage were doubled, the pay gap between men and women was decreased. Cyprus banking sector collapsed because of the EU rules, private, independent, trying to provide cover to the normal mismanagement and loss gambling. Used even the mass media to enhance shifting the responsibility to the executive government. The total of the position was misleading the people that no measure were taken. Troika avoided to conclude the deal with our government because they couldn't force their views on us. They choose to wait for the right wing to come in power. Cyprus Working is a clear neoliberal. They claim that Troika's manifest could easily be their own, not even without the crisis being existing. After the end of Troika's measurement, they keep the austerity policy and they even increase it. Just some example through the history that what Cyprus have faced. In March 2013, with two decisions of the Eurogroup, they exercised an experiment to establish a new model for managing banking crisis using the bail-in method, cutting the bank deposit. Cyprus was a test animal. The failure of this move was proven that it wasn't ever used again. Since the worst part, it was that our government, not only you, it was a co-writer with the EU and the IMF, and that shows that they share a common class interest. The result of it, beside what happened in Cyprus, is that the rules of common market will be violated whenever EU, European Central Bank or IMF wants. Second example was with the branches of Cypriot banks in Greece, where they had 1/3 of their deposit. European Committee, the European Central Bank, insisted blackmail in order the branches to be sold in a Greek bank on a ridiculous price. That's how the economies of Greece and Cyprus will be separated. On the first case, the depositors were treated as investors who had to pay their gambling, their investing. On the second, The depositor have no consequences. The message was again clear. On the name of stability of Eurozone, a small economy like Cyprus could be sacrificed. The third example has to do with the clearance of the Cooperative Bank of Cyprus to a private one. The Co-Bank was one of the biggest achievements of the popular movement of Cyprus. The only support of working people among decades for housing, education, pension for their children and their future. With the blessing of the EU, passes to the private sector as a gift, with not even a real income for the state. In contrast, the state had to give money to secure the investment. Concluding just roughly, among the latest year, the national debt were double in the last 8 years. We lost 10% of our GDP. The income for labor was decreased by 20%, with the income for capital increasing. Between 2002 and 2015, the percentage of labor income went for low again, 13% for 55 to 42. 1/3 of the population is under the living standard. We are having 20% unemployment among the youth. Cyprus is the champion of the income inequality on wages, decreases rate, and not serviceable loan, and we are in the bottom on healthcare, social protection. Those just roughly
Andres.
image.
Thank you, Andres, for giving us an outline of how difficult the situation is in Cyprus. I'm very pleased to invite Mick now to tell us about the situation in Ireland, General Secretary of the Connolly Association.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the CPB for the invitation. I suppose just to start to say a little bit about the Connolly Association. I think we're the only organisation here that isn't a political party. We're a reasonably broad church. The association is this kind of single issue campaign for Irish unity and independence in this country. And we're the oldest and largest political organisation, the Irish in Britain. And what I wanted to talk about, as opposed to discussing the impact the European Union has had on Ireland today, which would be much the same as in Greece or in Cyprus, I wanted to talk about the history of Ireland and the European Union, which eventually boils down to Anglo-Irish relations. So the association was in a special position to comment on that. So I'll talk you through that there now. So as an organisation rooted in the labour and democratic movements in Britain, I consider our most important contribution, especially in light of recent developments, has been our consistent attempts to instil within those movements an understanding and appreciation of the national question. Following the Second World War, attempts were being made across Western Europe, encouraged by the Marshall Plan, to advocate free trade as a cornerstone of macroeconomics, on the pretext that it was protectionism that had led to the outbreak of the Second World War. With empires increasingly being challenged and the highly protectionist policies of Europe's dominant imperialist countries restricting the availability of markets, the capitalists of those countries were driven to aggressive expansion. It began as an inter-imperialist conflict. This line of argument was used to advocate the need for free trade, or rather for the needs of the capitalist classes of those countries to have unfettered access to other economies as opposed to democratic control of national economies. And in Ireland, this was advanced by T.K. Whitaker through Sean Lemass, and it manifested itself in programmes for economic expansion and in the Anglo-Irish trade talks of the early 60s. Now, T.K. Whitaker, I'd imagine no one in the room has heard of him. He was an Irish civil servant. He was voted Man of the Millennium, which shows the grip the European Union now has on the public psyche in Ireland. Ultimately, the adoption of laissez-faire policies by both states would see British industry destroyed and Irish industry strangled in its crib, with the reversal of attempts since the 1930s to develop domestic industry. The consequence was the nation-state, the only mechanism history has evolved that's managed to place democratic controls on capital, being grossly undermined. It will see the workers of both Britain and Ireland placed firmly under the yoke of finance capital. Militarily, it will be overseen by NATO, and in the Cold War context, this brought Britain's strategic goals in relation to Ireland into focus, with Ireland's position at the Atlantic approach to Europe being a location of significant military importance. The Connolly Association, as an organisation in Britain, was in a unique position to comment from an Irish perspective on these developments. The structured Irish economy was under review by the late 50s with a programme for economic expansion, declaring the minimal role the state would play in industrial development, limiting it only to unprofitable sectors. The early Anglo-Irish trade talks in 1960 were described by the association through its newspaper, The Irish Democrat, as an attempt to sell Irish tariffs. The proposal was that Irish tariffs would be abolished in return for Irish cattle to receive the same price in Britain as British cattle. The British rejected the proposal and the association commented, "Very well then, don't try to sell them. Put them up, not down. Trade to other countries. Bring back investments from abroad and set up industries in Ireland to keep our people at home to eat our own beef." In May 1961, the Connolly Association's Irish Democrat became the first publication in Britain to oppose a drive towards European integration and supranational governance. This was in the same edition of the paper that announced the very first Civil Rights March for Ireland. This article asserted, while the advantages are uncertain and seem to offer little as substance, one thing is clearly offered by the common market. That lies in the guarantee of free mobility of capital and labour. The Irish capitalist, who has already sent £600 million of Irish money overseas, would be given greater facilities for investing abroad. The Irish man and woman would be given a far wider choice of places to emigrate to. In July 1961, Ireland and the UK both applied to join the EEC, unsuccessfully, and in 1963 the second programme for economic expansion declared, "In these years every sector of the economy must adapt itself to the new economic environment created by the evolution of the EEC and the movement towards freer trade in Western Europe and North America, the areas with which we have closest trading relations." In early 1965, Lemass called a general election to scatter his opposition and get a safe 5 years in office in which Fianna Fáil could get the country into the common market. And so he had attached his personal prestige to the policy of retreat from the national struggle in Fianna Fáil. What followed was a series of trade talks in London in order to establish a free trade area covering the UK and Ireland, which the Irish Democrat broke the silence on. There was a printers' strike in Dublin at the time, and it meant there was little or no discussion of the details of the talks in the newspapers in Ireland, and the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, was in recess, so commentators could only speculate on the subject matter of the talks. The periodical Business and Finance, a weekly survey of Ireland's trade, finance and property market, headlined, "Exclusive, Anglo-Irish Common Market, the border to go." So you hear a lot of that now, people talking about the border in relation to Brexit. The Vice President of Irish Labour claimed that what they were discussing was the re-entry of the 26 counties into the United Kingdom. If Lemass and Mr High have their way, the 26 counties will be as much a part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland is today. Sinn Féin claimed it was nothing less than another act of union. Even Fine Gael, that's the Irish Tory party, wanted to know what is to happen to Irish economic independence, the development of markets outside Britain, the effect of British competition in agriculture and the maintenance of employment. The Connolly Association commented of the British Prime Minister, "What a disgrace a Labour Premier should lend himself to the restoration of the old imperialism." However, the full consequences of that agreement were yet to become evident. In June 1967, the association covered the then Taoiseach, that's the Irish Prime Minister, Jack Lynch's admission that the pact contained secret clauses that were never published, one of which was that Ireland must enter the EEC should Britain choose to. Should Britain itself be admitted into membership, whatever the cost to Ireland. Ireland was coerced into membership. And you have people in Ireland now today, they say, well, just because we followed them in doesn't mean we have to follow them out. What we'd say back to them is, if someone drags you into a hole and they climb out of it, you're entitled to climb out yourself. Right? In 1968, the association's position was delivered at a lecture entitled "The National Question, Socialism and Nationalism" by Desmond Reeves, which outlined, national independence is one of the most important forms of democracy. It is playing and will play a decisive role in the dethronement of the parasitic class which had no more interest in the British or French workers than an economic army of occupation. The freedom of all nations to develop without external interference, but in growing mutual collaboration, by which the national divisions that separate humanity can be transformed from elements of misunderstanding and antagonism into components of a world culture that preserves all that's valuable from the past. Following the formal accession of Ireland and Britain to the EEC, a death notice appeared on the front page of the Irish Democrat. It read, "On 31st of December 1972, British and Irish democracy ceased to exist. The two countries are now under tyrannies. We advise no rash action. Tyrants can bite nastily. Over the next few years there will unfold the bitter fruits of the incredible wickedness of the politicians who bulldoze the peoples of these islands to their ruin in Europe. Already in Ireland and Britain, excellent organisations have been formed to resist the effects. but above all we counsel using the established machinery of the working class movement, which alone is strong enough to win back our freedom. However, in June 1975, a referendum was to be held regarding the UK's membership of the EEC. The association threw itself into the campaign, and on the front page the Irish Democrat stated that we hoped every Irish worker will go out and vote no to the common market on June the 5th. If he feels any doubt, or if he doesn't understand all the complicated economic argumentation put out purposefully to confuse, let him look at the men who are now supporting it and compare them with the men who are opposing it. The supporters of the common market are the traditional enemies of Ireland and the Irish. The Tory establishment, the Lords, big business, the most right-wing members of the Labour Party, and Save the Mark, the two nation merchants of the so-called British and Irish Communist Organisation, which has been described, by the way, as neither British, Irish, Communist nor yet an organisation. On the other side are the traditional friends of Ireland, trade unions by overwhelming majority, the rank and file and the best leaders of the Labour Party are Celtic cousins of Wales and Scotland, plus every single Republican strand in the Irish community in Britain. Surely you'll stand up and counter with the second group rather than the first. Unfortunately, there's been slight changes to those two groupings as they've panned out. A lot of the organisations in Irish in Britain didn't play a positive role in the most recent referendum. Anyway, that referendum was won by the force of reaction, but the association continued to actively campaign for national sovereignty, not only for Ireland, but as a principle for all nations. In 1985, the association organised a conference on national sovereignty and the defence of the nation state, which was held in Conway Hall here in London. At that conference it was declared that within the Labour movement there are sections that decry the national independence struggle as a diversion from the task of getting socialism. What they really mean is talking about socialism. For there's scarcely one progressive step decided on by a Labour Party conference that would not involve the defiance of the EEC in flouting its rules. Tremendous pressures would be applied, but up to now there has been no European army to enforce the will of Brussels. It is time that the Labour movement declared national sovereignty to be one of the fundamental elements of democracy. The British people have a fight for sovereignty on their hands. Sovereignty for the Welsh and the Scots, if they want it and it's up to them, stands in no sort of opposition to this. And as for the Irish, they'll go on fighting for it until the majority of the Irish people rule the whole of their own country. So the association maintained that position and has done since then a campaign for a leave vote in a referendum on Britain's membership of the EU in 2016. We registered as a campaigner and we campaigned on it. If anything, the reason to oppose the common market had been magnified since 1975. Since Britain voted to leave the European Union, every effort has been made by the force of reaction to stop it happening. 3 years later, it remains uncertain whether or not there will be a clean break with the EU. Throughout this period, the Irish people have been presented as an obstacle to Brexit. This is a direct result of the campaigning of Remainers who have developed a disingenuous sympathy for the Irish people to mask their own aims. The Irish government's also played a negative role by not fulfilling its own obligations to its citizens, but rather seeking to get on the panel of the so-called Team EU. Neither the Irish government nor the European Union nor the main campaigners have considered the impact of this on the very significant population of the Irish people living and working in Britain, and the perception of those people by the 17.4 million people who've been cheated of their democratic right. Instead of seeking to mediate between Britain and the EU to find the best solution for its citizens, the Irish government has adopted an approach of frustrating Brexit. Now, if you look at how ridiculous that is from Ireland's point of view, Ireland does the majority of its trade with a currency it has no control over. It does the majority of its trade outside the Eurozone, and once Britain leaves the European Union, Ireland do the majority of its trade outside of the European Union as well. And the backstop has now become the most recent addition to the very long list of reactionary consequences of the partition of Ireland. It's worth noting there's nothing whatsoever in the Good Friday Agreement or subsequent agreements that requires membership of the European Union by both Britain and Ireland in order for it to operate effectively. There is a reference to working within the framework of the European Union which is purely incidental. It's of no consequence whatsoever to the functioning of the agreement. This, however, has not prevented a fragile peace being booted about by those who have never had any interest in it and are using it now just for their own purposes. The Connolly Association is not in the business of trying to identify the best means of implementing partition and has not proposed any solution, because we don't believe there can be one, other than the obvious one of Irish unity and independence. And we call on progressives here in Britain to act as persuaders to that end. Anyway, thank you very much.
Very enlightening speech by Mick. Thank you very much, Mick. And now, Maurice, it's up to you. It's in your hands. Why should we leave the EU?
Thanks, reactionary lord representing the Labour Party. It's nice to be here. I'm always happy to see the international debate. My uncle Dave went to fight with them, and it's really wonderful to be here. And thanks for the invitation. I was thinking about this left grouping as well. I wondered why you left the E out. Leave, fight, transform. Because our fundamental thing we're going to do, we've got to educate these idiotic progressives who think that there is no distinction between globalisation and internationalism. And that's the fundamental issue I think that we've got to really educate about, is look how decrepit we've become. I'm talking about Labour here, is that we think that the free movement of capital, the free movement of goods, the free movement of services, and the free movement...
Can you speak up?
Yeah, sorry, I'm a mumbler, I am. And I learned that in the Lords, to mumble. Is that these four freedoms make democracy effectively impossible. That's the point. There's nothing that you could. It's not only anti-democratic profoundly, and I really heard what you said. I'd add water to the things that Turkey uses in order to manipulate its neighbours, and particularly what they're doing in relation to the Kurds is absolutely scandalous. But the EU, and I've really considered this issue, has got to be the greatest capitalist project ever devised by the human mind. It's an extraordinary thing that by treaty law in each national polity, it effectively makes resistance to capitalism illegal. If you resist the free movement of capital, that becomes a criminal offence because it's the breaking of the treaty. So the first thing is obviously for me, democracy. It's not just about the referendum result. The EU structurally subordinates democracy to treaty law. Treaty law is the paramount thing. The ECJ is at the apex of the interpretation. And if you look at many different rulings, but particularly if you look at Laval, the Laval ruling, it gives the priority to capital over labour. And this is a matter of juridical, as they like to call it, what a terrible word, or legal priority. So I think I'm just mentioning that as part of left, can we bring the E back in and educate the left about the actual meaning of what the EU means. So the first aspect is just the first principle, I think, of socialism, which is of the people, by the people, for the people. That it's a democratic system, and we live and die by that. But democracy doesn't matter for the EU. It's about this legal order that protects the priority of capital, and also undermines the ability to generate solidarities, which is one of the things that the Labour movement did do in our country. And I completely honour the Irish contribution to the Labour movement in the past 200 years. The second is that we have to assert absolutely that internationalism, our solidarity with the people of Cyprus, absolutely with the people of Greece, which we've been following, and thanks for your talks. I learned something. I've always understood it as a bit of a kind of casino, like Russian oligarchs and yachts and that sort of thing. But absolutely our international solidarity with workers and people who are being exploited and oppressed by capitalism. But what the EU is the bedrock of that system. It absolutely upholds that particular system. And as you said completely correctly, the most sustained and sustainable and effective system of democracy has manifested itself continuously through the nation state. And to deprive us of that ability means that it's an eternal system of legally sanctioned capitalism. There is no way out of it whatsoever. But the third thing that I want to bring up, which is complete for those of us who are interested in politics and really didn't want to go into law as a way of life, is this defiance of working class leadership, of working class agency. This is the most disgraceful thing. I have never heard more progressive people despise a class of people in the way that I've heard. They've actually, a concept that I never thought I'd ever hear is something that I hear in Parliament, is that they're undereducated. The commitment to Brexit is the result basically of not having enough stupid teachers telling them about globalisation is the same as internationalism. Brexit is decried as racist, as imperialist, as you cannot. I've got a son in school and he tells me that he cannot defend Brexit in school because he will be condemned by his teachers. That's setting aside the everything. That's why I think that this educational role has got to be very strong. But what are we doing? And this is what I want to talk about, the politics, by the Labour leadership abandoning its historic commitment to leave the EU. And that's not just this present leadership. If you look at Attlee was against the EU, Bevan was against the EU, Bevan was against the EU, Barbara Castle was I mean, there's a long tradition of Euroscepticism in Labour. If Labour is no longer going to represent working class sentiments about democracy and their absolutely reasonable view that democracy is a better bet than the ECJ, then those of us who are old enough to remember losing the argument in the 70s, which was vivid, this will be won by the right. This will be won by the right because they will champion democracy and through that impose a system of national capitalism and a whole load of trade deals relating to the world that will be hostile to the working class. And what I say is the fault is in ourselves. Here I'm not talking about the Communist Party, which has taken an impeccable position on this.
Always.
But within, well, not always, but we'll talk about that later. You always want to bring family arguments. Anyway, I'm going to let that one go. But in this particular case, we will be, the progressive left will be the agents for the victory of the right. But they will abandon democracy. They will abandon any form of socialist political economy that upholds the dignity of labour, the power of labour and labour value. It will have completely obscured the difference between internationalism and globalisation, and ultimately it would have gifted the results of this interregnum we're leading to the right, because the working class would have received no leadership whatsoever from us. So to conclude, what I've got to say is that we've got a job on, a real job on. We've got to stand with our position of upholding democracy. We've got to honour the political views of people who didn't go to university as being absolutely legitimate. With the rupture with the working class is now becoming extreme, and the consequences of that are really frightening. And within our movement, we've got to restore a real, organise, certainly, agitate, definitely, but educate too, that the EU is the very opposite of socialism and that it must be resisted.
Thank you very much, Maurice. And now we'll ask Mary to speak on behalf of the Communist Party, the London Communist Party.
Well, I think everybody in this room has come here because they are opposed to the EU. So I'm not going to spend time in saying why we're here, because we know we're here, and why we're here. And I'm not even going to speculate on what is a very fast-moving political situation. I only want to reiterate our demand that we have to leave, that we have to honour the result of the referendum, and that the Communist Party has always taken this position. Always. And that is utterly consistent. And the reason why we've always taken this position is because we do understand the division between capital and labour. We do understand that internationalism is far more important than Euro-nationalism, and it's far more important than nationalism. After all, what is the slogan of the Communist Manifesto? Workers of all countries unite. Of all countries, not just European countries. So I'm not going to dwell on the horrors of the EU. What I want to do is to go beyond the slogans and to try to analyse the thinking behind the slogans, in a way taking up Maurice's point about education. I'm sure that I'm not going to be pedantically educative, but we have these slogans. The EU is a big business racket, democracy delayed is democracy denied, leave the EU now, etc. So what is the thinking behind it? Well, I think that we have to be pretty careful in the way that I understand the way in which the debate has been framed at the moment. I think we have to analyse and understand and reject the notion of the national interest as opposed to what we understand by class interest. And the reason that I say that I think is fairly obvious. The national interest is always the interest of the ruling class. That's what the national interest is, the interest of capital. But the interesting thing is that at this moment, the ruling class is divided. Capitalism is divided. The Tory party is divided, absolutely fundamentally divided. I don't think there has been such a division since 1846 and the repeal of the Corn Laws, where well, I'm not going to go into it, but basically it was a debate and a conflict between free traders or free trade capitalism and protectionism, which was supported by the aristocratic interest. So why are there divisions within the capitalist class now? This is a big question which I feel we have to spend, well, actually probably have to give a lot more analysis to, but just a shorthand, there is a division within capitalism. I think there's a division within finance capitalism between the globalisers and those who can see that Europe is the better bet. And if you look at people like Reeves, these are hedge fund capitalists. They are the globalisers. They don't need Europe. They do need the world. And that suits them very, very much. And they need America in particular. So TTIP and all the stuff with Trump is absolutely grist to their mill. So these divisions, I think, do need to be analysed. They're palpable. There's a materialist basis for the divisions within capital, which at our peril we don't take advantage of. So there's a lot of talk about the national interest now, particularly in the Labour Party in this current crisis. The formation of a national government, for example, the formation of this alliance in the national interest to prevent a no deal. But really, this is a cover for, it's specious in fact, this talk of national interest, and it's a cover for papering over the divisions within the ruling class in order to allow the continued free movement of capital. Well, why don't we capitalise on these divisions? I think that we really shouldn't do that. I mean, lessons from history, I think this is the we ought to learn from history. And the classic example, I think, is Ramsay MacDonald. If we don't learn that lesson, in 1929 to 31, there was a minority Labour government which was allowed to be there by Baldwin, who wanted the Labour government to do the work that the Tories didn't want to do, and better, as Baldwin said, to have a Labour in power with its claws cut. And its claws cut meant that basically they could be got rid of at any time, and they were. And as a result of that, in 1931, Ramsay MacDonald formed a national government from 31 to 35, a total disaster, a complete betrayal of the Labour movement, the Labour Party. Talks of national government only work in the interest of the ruling class, and that government absolutely did, and it shattered the Labour Party for a long time. I won't go into the history, but we shouldn't not have any truck with any notions of the national interest in national government. So, if we don't have a national interest, what is our class interest? Well, of course, the ruling class interest is very clear. They do want to paper over the cracks, but I want to talk about our class interest. What is the interest of the working class? Well, it is to leave the EU. It's the only way to end austerity and transform this country, to hope for the many, not the few. But that's Labour Party policy, and that Labour is not and does not adhere to its own policy, because the Labour movement is divided. I would argue that yes, the Labour movement is divided, but I don't think the working class is divided on this question. What they haven't got is consistent leadership from the party which ought to be saying exactly what I've just said, that for many, not the few, you can't be in the EU. It is impossible, absolutely impossible. So that means that we've got a working class which, by and large, without going into numbers, probably, if we define classes in relation to the mode of production, those who sell their labour power, probably we've got a fair majority of workers who are against the EU. But the problem for us now is, because of the Labour Party, and by the way, the left is divided. I say the Communist Party's already had a consistent position, but other groups on the left, on the Trotskyist left, for example, do not have a consistent position. Some do, some don't. So this then means that in the absence of political leadership, the workers can be potentially seduced by the populist rhetoric of the Brexit Party. This is our problem. And this is why education, agitation and organisation are absolutely key to making some, to galvanising some kind of response in a progressive direction. I know some people don't like the word progressive, but I'm going to use it anyway. But the Labour movement silence, I think, is, and the divisions within the Labour movement are palpable. I think there are divisions between leaders and led, frankly. It's a bit like the growth of the shop stewards movement against the Labour leadership during the First World War, because they had a class understanding. Today, I read a very interesting comment from Len McCluskey, who appeared to be moving in a moderately pro-Brexit position. Now, the fact is that I don't think there's a single union in this country that ever debated the issue of European Union membership with its own members. Jacques Delors came to the TUC in 1980, thank you, and seduced the TUC into thinking that social Europe was absolutely going to solve all our problems. This was after in the 70s, when the labour movement was very strong. We had a membership up until 1979, the trade unions, 12 million. We had an alternative economic strategy that was even being talked about by the TUC, and then Thatcher came and smash banged the trade unions. TUC took the easy way out and then said, social Europe, Jacques Delors, that's what we'll go for. Social Europe is dead and buried, and it's about time we recognise that, and it's about time the TUC and various unions recognise that. And as I say, I don't think this issue has ever been debated democratically within any union. All but 3 unions have merely followed the line of the Labour leadership. But, as Maurice said, or somebody else said, I can't remember, this is a new position for the Labour movement. If contrast Tony Benn, who said in Cabinet before the 1975 EEC referendum, he said, in practice, Britain will be governed by a European coalition that we cannot change, dedicated to a capitalist dedicated to a capitalist or market economic theology. Good word. This policy is to be sold to us by projecting an unjustified optimism about the community, an unjustified pessimism about the United Kingdom. Could have been written today, couldn't it? Designed to frighten us. We shall be choosing between the unity of the UK and the unity of the EEC. It will impose appalling strains on the Labour movement. I mean, that was the position of the Labour movement and of the Labour Party and almost every trade union in the 1975 referendum. And it's gone. So again, understanding and learning from our own history, I think is quite important. How did that happen? I haven't got time to say how it happened. I think I know, but I just want to say that, or draw the conclusion from this. I think we do have to make a distinction, not a distinction, but we have to see what are our principles, what are our tactics, and what are our strategy. The principle, I think, is an obvious one, and that is socialism. And a road to socialism has been opened up by the potential of a left-led Labour government with a manifesto commitment for the many, not the few. That's excellent. But the principle can only be achieved by a means of popular sovereignty. Now, there are people who would say that actually I'm wrong. The principle isn't socialism, the principle is Brexit. I would argue that defeating the EU and coming out of the EU and Brexit is a necessary strategy in order to achieve the principle. If we elevate Brexit just into a principle, then we're missing the point about the transformation of society. We can't transform society if we're within the EU because of the lack of democracy, there's no control, and so on. So I think, therefore, the issue of Brexit has to be put in that context. We want Brexit because we want social change. And we have to have social change, otherwise we're almost going to be extinct. So that's the strategy, is Brexit. It's vital because everything else is impossible otherwise. Now, what about tactics? Well, this is the question now. How do we go from A to B? Do we want a general election? The Communist Party says we should have a general election. It might well be, as you've heard the news today, that a general election will be called if tomorrow, actually Wednesday's vote, goes against the government. Do we want no deal? Yes, we can live with no deal. We can live with, we have to be out of the EU. We could live with a good deal or no deal, but it's likely to be no deal. What do we think about prorogation of Parliament? What do we think about Parliament versus the executive? What do we think about the potential for mass mobilisation? Well, I think that our view should be that extra parliamentary struggle is the absolute key to everything. It's the key to social change, and it's the key to winning this particular battle. Parliamentary sovereignty is an important issue, in my opinion, which is why I think prorogation sets a very dangerous precedent. And I think there's been all sorts of ridiculous parallels made between the proroguing of this Parliament and what happened in the English Revolution in the 17th century. Parliament wasn't prorogued then by Charles I, it was abolished. And there was a revolution. It was a change of class power from one class, state power from one class to another. We're not in that situation at the moment, and proroguing Parliament, although we should oppose it, we shouldn't overinflate what's happened. I think we should oppose it because I think we are committed, even in a bourgeois democracy, to parliamentary sovereignty. But parliamentary sovereignty is only important if there is popular sovereignty, if Parliament reflects the wishes of the people. We've struggled for the vote for centuries. Women, working class people, we have got the vote, we should use it. And as Tony Benn said in his, I thought, a very interesting, well, not interesting, but he always emphasised this point about democracy. He said, when I saw how the European Union was developing, it was very obvious what they had in mind was not democratic. In Britain, you vote for a government, so the government has to listen to you. And if you don't like it, you can change it. That's the issue. So we must change it. We don't like it. Popular sovereignty, the will of the people, is expressed through our class interest expressed in Parliament. That really requires the development of class consciousness, which is why a Communist Party is so important. So we do need to build on what the mass movement is developing at the moment, and it's developing in a peculiar way. It's developing by Remainers who are who talk about the Johnson coup, and it's being developed also by Leavers who can see that actually the Johnson coup is a denial of democracy, but it is in order to force through a Brexit which is not in the interest of the people, which will be in the interest of the hedge funds and of the Rees-Moggs of this world. So when we talk about Brexit for the people, we do want a different kind of Brexit. We do want an internationalist sort of Brexit, which means that we can actually build a different society, unshackled by the appalling nature of TTIP and other sorts of organisations. So our slogan end austerity for the many, not the few, we have to leave the EU. I don't think there's any question about it, but we have got a big mountain to climb. We have to build, I think, on the beginnings of a movement that is there. We have got a new campaign, Leave, Educate, Fight, Transform. That campaign is beginning to unite disparate forces within the Labour movement, and I think could have a very, very big potential. If there is a general election, and we hope there will be one, then we have got a mountain of work to do. But we have to keep in mind what our basic principle is. And our basic principle has to be that we want social transformation leading to socialism. That's why we have to oppose the EU. That's why we have to agitate. That's why we have to educate. And above all, organise.
Well, I think we've had many excellent contributions. Thank you, Mary, and giving us a sort of way forward. Alex,
Yes.
before we move into questions, do you want to say something about left, or do you want to leave it for later?
I'll say something.
I think it'd be quite good if you said that, because Mary's mentioned it.
Okay, so it's been mentioned by a couple of speakers, but there's a campaign that's been launched last month by the Communist Party, along with other socialist organisations and individuals, called Leave, Fight, Transform, using but I actually think that's a fantastic suggestion that you made, Maurice, and something we'll no doubt come back to. The attempt is to do something better than has been done before. Almost every attempt to build a socialist coalition against the EU has founded on the rocks of left sectarianism, various diverging analyses, and in general the appalling position that the majority probably of left-wing organisations in this country take on the question of imperialism. So this is an attempt to try to do something better, and it's not guaranteed to succeed. Many people would say it's a very difficult thing to build given the conditions we're in today. But what's been pleasing is that after a founding statement was published in the Morning Star and a very small and modest website was established, we've had huge amounts of interest from young people, particularly, who can see that they can smell the coffee. They can see that they're being taken in vain. They're being told that if they're below the age of 25, they must automatically be in favour of remaining in the EU. Anyone who's been patronised by the Remain campaign for the last 3 years is pretty sick and tired of being told that they must believe in the EU if they aren't a low information individual, as I think they call us. So this is an attempt to try and build that. We're looking for people to get involved. You can go on our website, you can sign up, give your email address, we'll be in touch with you. There are lots of activities being organised. The next and most important one for us is going to be a fringe meeting at the TUC next week in Brighton, where Arthur Scargill is coming out of retirement to speak on our platform, alongside the General Secretary of the Communist Party and a number of leading trade union figures. So that will be very interesting to see who turns up from the TUC to hear that. Which of the delegates turn up from the TUC to hear that, I should say. And we'll be going on to hold fringe meetings at political party conferences later this month. It's an important campaign to be part of, and I urge you to have a look at our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, get involved, and send us your email address so we can correspond with you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks. Okay, and now I think we should start with questions, and I mean questions. Just a minute. And can you say who you're asking, who the question is for, and then we will go to contributions, and then we'll have a summary. So you've got a question. Is it a question or a
It's a question, yeah. It's a 1 minute question.
Right.
Oh.
It's not attempted to repeat the Communist Manifesto. The EU has been in trade dispute with the United States since 2004. Boris Johnson wants close association with the United States. Can we make it clear that we do not want to team up with the USA?
Thanks a lot. I think I'll pick 2 or 3 questions, yes.
My name's Gwen Cook. I'm a member of the Labour Party, and I'm in the Fulham and Chelsea constituency, and there's a lot of people there on the right wing who keep pressing for the EU to remain and all that, under various guises. And I keep trying to tell them that it's a capitalist club. We can't reclaim our industries in the EU, and that is an essential, etc. And I think I've got a few more tips from tonight. But I am so disappointed that the leadership of the Labour Party seem to be talking about Remain. John McDonnell, I had every faith in him. It was great he was Shadow Chancellor. Seen him a few times at Burston. Used to have a close association with him in Hammersmith when we were campaigning for Irish reunification of the Colony Society. And it's just, can anyone explain, can Morris explain why they have apparently gone over to a Remain standpoint when they know with the manifesto it can't be done?
I think maybe these are quite big questions actually.
Could answer it quite quickly.
Yeah, would you like to answer that one? Shall I take some more? Okay. Yes.
Steve Metcalf, I'm Regional Council Vice President for RMT Manchester North West. We're at the sharp end, like, you know, we're these ignorant working we can't always keep.
He's an ignorant working class.
We're these ignorant working class people that seem to know more than what they're telling us, you know, sometimes. And you end up getting your head in your hands for doing so. We are facing Directive 90/4/441 that privatised the railway. The EU directive, Major followed on and did what they told him. And in December we're facing the Fourth Rail Protocol, which is extending privatisation to all of Europe of railways. And if we're not out of the EU by then, we won't be able to renationalise any railways, not just here, in Europe. But I want to ask a general question. Do you not think, everybody there, that this is just the next attempt after several over the last 2,000 years, dating from Justinian, the Byzantine Empire, then Charlemagne? You get a Charlemagne prize for being a good boy or girl in Europe, don't you? And he was a so-and-so, and all the rest. The last, then Hitler, and the Kaiser this century wanted to restore a slave empire, didn't they? And this is the latest attempt to recreate that slave empire that they've tried to do, despite all the suffering that's been caused in wars. They're trying to do it again, another slave empire. Wage slavery, an actual slavery. It'll end up as if we don't stop it. So do you not think that's historically what we've got to concentrate on and stop that as well?
I think that's quite a lot of questions actually to start with. Who would like to start answering?
I'll start.
Yeah, go on then, Maurice.
I'm very sympathetic. I'm here, and I think it's really important to see that there's been systematic attempts to subordinate democracy all the way through to some periods of wrong. Now, I've also had a very close relationship with John McDonnell. We campaigned together against the City of London.
I can't hear you.
We campaigned together.
Stand up.
Sorry.
Thank you.
God, it's like being at work. I haven't got the mic. This issue with Corbyn and McDonnell is interesting. It would be easy to say, I mean, I campaign with John McDonnell a lot on the City of London. My bugbear is the fact that we've got the most ancient city, continuous democratic city in the world, that's entirely owned by capital. That has, so I'm very in favour of all of London becoming the City of London. That's just by the by. And there was a time when John McDonnell was interested in campaigns like that and supported it in Parliament. I don't know what the experience I was told by a really great Irish Catholic friend of mine, that when the bishops put on their hat, the blood supply to their brain stops. And I've watched this with several Labour leaders, but the real reason that McDonnell and Corbyn have completely renounced their commitments of a lifetime is because the overwhelming progressive left support remain. The pressure on them is relentless about that globalisation is great, that this is racist, that this is a right-wing project, this is a Trump project. We're walking right into the conservative trap right now. If you think that Trump is pump-priming education and running a Keynesian policy mistaken. So with McDonnell, in particular, the disappointment I share, but when I watch him, and he doesn't even return my gaze when we pass in the corridor now, he's gone completely off. But what I think is that ultimately, I don't know what you think, Alex, we haven't been robust enough in putting the argument forward in the Labour movement, and in the end they retreated into a conformed position in the name of unity, in the name of party unity, in the name of, and they didn't challenge this, what I call progressive consensus. You know, I always say to people, it's the last thing you want to hear when you go to the doctor. It's progressive. You know, and it's this idea, they don't use the word socialist, they don't use the word democratic, they use this word, and what it means is no borders, free movement, legal rights. It doesn't mean democracy, association, agitate, organise and educate. So I think what the story is that we have to make, Alex, this left really work and really be a voice in the movement. And then it could be that it gives them some space to move back into when the truth is told. And what the truth is told is what Mary said, quoting Tony Benn: you can't replace them, you can't change anything, and it's a legal order completely built on capital. It's a really straightforward thing. So unfortunately we're going to have to do it ourselves. You know, there is no I can tell you there is no leadership in Parliament for Brexit. And I feel that every day that I'm there, and I don't want to go back to school tomorrow.
Has anybody else? Yeah, but hold on. Does anybody else want to comment on the question that were asked? No.
I would like to make a
yes.
comment to the question. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, Stephen. It's a very interesting point, actually, because the EU has been passing laws not only just in privatization, not only financially, but also in creating a culture of, as we call it in the cookware, the modern slavery. So people that would be willing to live with 600 euros, people that would be willing to live with less and less every time. This is exactly what I try to pass on through my speech, that if someone is today talking about leaving European Union without putting on the table the question, who is going to lead my country afterwards, it's like changing clothes on a rainy day. So I'm just wearing my coat, I get soaked, okay, then I change another coat, you will be soaked again. This is something that was very well answered in Greece with Syriza. Syriza was a left-wing party before the elections. It was really coming into collision with the laws there, the European Union, not in principle, of course, but talking about it's gonna destroy what former parties like PASOK and Nea Demokratia did, New Democracy. So afterwards, after a few years, not only did they collide with this interest, but it became worse. So there was a third memorandum, which was actually passed only by Syriza with the support of all the others. So what we would comment on that is be very careful who you support, because if you don't have a very straightforward concept of what's going to come afterwards, if you are not targeting as a communist party or as a left people directly on a socialist communist state, so if you're not thinking of how are we going to organize our labor people within the unions, creating very separate poles, very separate party, let's say, in there against the current policy, then I think problems will reoccur again and again. Thank you very much.
Okay. Alex, it's Richard, isn't it? No, Alex first, and then Jonathan. Richard, and then Jonathan. Yeah, questions. Are there questions, Alex?
Yes.
Alex,
yes,
yeah. Off you go, Alex.
I would like to.
And then you.
We've had a couple of questions and a couple of speakers commenting on the unfortunate and some would say suicidal position that the Labour leadership has got itself into. But I think that we also have to remember that this isn't just the Labour Party that is doing this. The rot didn't start with the Labour Party. Look at the TUC, look at the British trade union movement, the majority of whose members voted to leave the European Union. And of that entire movement of 6 million workers, or 6.5 million workers, only 3 unions adopted a position of arguing for a leave vote, one of them being my union, Mick Carty's union, the RMT. So I think we have to ask ourselves some searching questions about what's gone wrong with the working class organised movement in this country, because it is not reflecting the views of its members. It's scared of asking its members the questions about what they believe and why they believe it. And it's telling its members fairy stories. For example, about the fact that free movement of labour doesn't affect wages. Well, workers can see clearly it affects wages, it affects conditions, and it's brought immiseration where there used to be previously at least relatively well paid and organised jobs in some cases. So there's some real questions we've got to ask about not just the Labour Party, but also the trade union movement. And I'd also just say to Mick Carty, if he could say something, if he wouldn't mind saying something, about the question about Sinn Féin, who he mentioned in his speech, how Sinn Féin has got itself into a position of being the biggest advocates for membership of the European Union that you could possibly imagine, similar to Plaid Cymru in Wales and the SNP in Scotland. It's a remarkable thing, and we shouldn't pass over it and fail to comment on it. So I'd ask anyone on the panel who wants to comment on those.
Okay, before you go ahead, I think, Alex, we've moved into contributions as well as questions. So if you want to make a contribution, please go ahead.
Can we have the answers to the questions?
Does anybody have an answer to this question about the United States?
I don't mind. I'll answer that and answer that. Just my own view of it is, I think with the United States, I think I'd say any sort of trade that's been done with the United States depends on the nature of the trade, and it depends on the basis it's being done on. I don't think calling for a boycott of the United States is a sort of possibility at present. But just on the other one with Sinn Féin, this is going to be a very quick answer, and I'm more than happy to discuss it privately, but as a rule the association doesn't comment on the political parties in Ireland. We decide that, like,
you just did.
No, but in general, say other people in the broader Republican family, where we make sure we're not publicly critical of them, and I don't have a whole lot positive to say at the minute, so I'm not going to.
Very positive. Yeah, Richard, and then this gentleman, and then Jonathan. Yeah. Yeah.
Dave Shepherd.
Jack, sorry, I'm sorry.
Former communist. I wanted to reiterate what Alex said. If you go upstairs and look at the Radar Research Department bulletin of June 2016, you'll see the advice that the various unions were giving to their members. And on the basis of the number of members they organised, I don't know how thoroughly they consulted, and I don't know the splits in opinion. Unions organising 70% of TUC workers advised remain. 25%, including the teachers, were neutral. 2% was silent. They don't take part in political activity, I don't know. And 2% said leave. Now, I believe Ben, in his earlier years, was actually in favour of Britain joining the EEC. But I'm glad to say, before he died, he helped to found Lexit.
Ben.
Oh, Ben.
The last election of the EU, I went along intending to boycott the election, and I tried to take away my blank ballot paper as a souvenir. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to. The ballot paper went in the box because the returning officer said you can't do what I'm trying to do. I'm obviously doing everything illegal. The last point, I'm sure the Electoral Reform Society noted in the run-up to the EU referendum in 2016 that elements on both sides of the debate, therefore, were A line and B or B breaching funding rules. The Electoral Commission didn't notice it, the certification officer did notice it, but the Electoral Reform Society did notice it. Is there mileage in trying to help a case? I know there are some vague cases coming up to question the validity of the way elections are held. There is no machinery to ensure factual honesty in electoral material. And I know that because in 1983 I sent to the ASA Tory party poster, like your manifesto, comrade. It was factually incorrect, but they said as an unelected body they wouldn't dream of interfering in the affairs of a democratic political party.
Thank you.
That's what I've got.
Thank
so
you very
there's no
much.
machinery to even try and provide a basis, minimum basis of truth.
Thank you. I think it's important to keep your contributions short. As I said, a lot of people want to speak. Yes, please. And then Jonathan, and then Andrew. Can you stand up so we can hear you? Yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Ryan. I'm not organised. Just to addressing Larry, I think you worded one question a bit suboptimally. You said, should, for example, communists or anybody else agree with the no-deal Brexit? Any clean Brexit at this point, until the end of October, can't only be a no Brexit deal. There's nothing else possible because the whole treaty, which was brought to Parliament 3 times, has 585 pages. There's no way, given all the recesses and so on, to renegotiate that.
That's right.
If there is a clean Brexit, it can only be a no-deal Brexit. It's the only alternative right now. Full stop. That's how it is. And if they are going to extend this deadline once again, the 4th time over this, the country is getting a bit ridiculous. I think there will be a serious consideration as to other people believing that Britain really wants to exit. So this is quite serious that no-deal Brexit, or WTO, whatever you want to call it, is the only alternative right now. And my concern right now, I think it's quite likely that Boris Johnson will keep up his rhetoric about no-deal, blah, 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 will go to the Brussels conference at the middle of October, will make some cosmetic changes to this May treaty, then possibly something like the backstop will go, but the whole rest will stay. And that will mean that Britain, if that would go to Parliament, and there will be a lot of pressure on all people in Parliament, MPs, to vote for it, that Britain will enter a treaty with the European Union, which effectively means that all the regulation will be adhered to without even the right to have any formal say in this and still pay contributions, which is quite a dangerous situation. And the only thing which makes really Boris Johnson think that might not be a good idea is, of course, that he will fear the Brexit party.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's what I think in terms of likelihood, something which is something should be seriously considered. And if I have to ask a question, I would ask, do you agree with me?
I do. I completely agree
Jonathan.
with everything you said.
So I will try and keep this short, but I wanted to sort of turn to the question that's sort of...
Do you mind standing up? Because it's for the people at the back, really.
I will stand, it's all right.
Thank you.
So the thing I was trying to think about was why is it that a lot of the contributions tonight have turned on this question of the Labour movement's leadership. Why is it that the trade union movement and the upper echelon and the Labour Party are so dominated by a Remain argument? And there's been a sort of bemoaning of this. I don't mean this to sound critical, and a criticism of this, but not really, I think, sufficient attempt to explain why is it that this has happened. Why is it that the composition of this debate over the EU has changed so radically from 1975? And I think that I don't disagree with what Mary said at all about probably the majority of working people. We probably do have a majority of working people who want to leave, but I don't think it's as big as that. And I think that my sense is that thinking about it's important to look at the way that the composition of Britain's working class has changed since 1975. The political economic changes that have taken place in Britain have stratified the working class in new ways and changed many of their economic relations. There are strata of people. Our productive industry is withered in Britain. Those bits of it that are left are quite entangled with long supply chains across Europe. These things make them people, whatever their feelings, they make them frightened of leaving because they think the jobs are going to go. There are a whole strata of the working class who are sort of have middling incomes, professions. They're attached to the city of London. They're concentrated in the southeast, or in big metropolitan centres, and their economic relations are different. And they identify for various reasons with the EU, even if not positively. They think that it's on balance, it's better than the alternative. And then there are people in the town, as we know, the kind of people who are described as left behind or whatever, concentrated in former industrial towns where employment's completely changed. They are have been much more likely to leave. I think it's these. We have to look at the way in which the working class is also divided. Mary's absolutely right to emphasise the divisions within the ruling class. They're profound and they're deep, and they're not likely to be solved. But the issue is, how do we unite the working class, recognising those differences, recognising those ideological forms that arise from different economic relationships, changed economic relationships, not qualitatively changed, but changed economic relationships. How do we unite our class before the ruling class unites its own class against us and builds an electoral coalition with which it can absolutely lay into Labour again? And I don't really know what the answer to that is. I think what you said is very is the right approach. I don't know. The tactics are just day by day we change them, but strategically it's right. I think we have to recognise that uniting the working class, across the broad mass of the working class across those strata, is actually a difficult job, and we won't be able to do it quickly. It's going to be like leaving the EU. It's probably going to be a protracted process.
Thank you, Jonathan. I had three hands up. We had Andrew, and then Ruth, and then Anne. And then Simon. And then I think that we'll go to summing up. I also would like to just make one quick point, if I'm allowed. I actually think when the referendum took place, nobody believed that Leave would win. And I think that because Jeremy Corbyn adopted a position of campaigning for Remain, and a lot of young people were joining the Labour Party at the time, thought he was right because they saw him as the progressive leader. And I think that he has never, the left of the Labour Party has never made the argument for leaving the EU. And therefore I think the role of educating young people, educating working people, the Labour Party has never carried that out. I think that has also been an area of
It would help
weakness.
if you had the statement.
Yeah, sure.
Andrew, your turn.
Yeah, I'm a member of the YCL and the Communist Party. This is a question directed to Mary Ann Morris, and it's just basically, let's say the general election is called and the Conservative Party win it again. What exactly is next for the Labour movement in the next 5 or so years of Tory rule that we have? What would be the next move to try and get the working class power
Thank you.
outside of the EU?
Thanks. Yeah. Is that everything, Andrew?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's everything. God.
Ruth?
Yeah.
Big
My
question.
name's Ruth Starr, I'm a member of the Communist Party, and there's
been some very useful contributions. I've learned some things and would like to thank our international comrades for their contributions tonight, because it's been executive for a number of people. I want to focus on the question of the labour movement and the divisions, and I think Jonathan has hit half of the nail on the head about why people, why we're in divisions within the labour movement at the moment. But I equally think there's a long history to this. Margaret Thatcher, from 1979 to when she demised, basically attempted to destroy the trade union movement. And she did a damn good job. We shrunk in numbers, the trade unions retreated for a range of reasons, with some honourable exceptions. But the response ever since then from the labour movement, I'm talking trade unions at the moment, has been to build larger and larger general unions. Now I was on the NEC of Unison for my sins, and I watched the Labour Party right-wing influence that was exercised through the union downwards to the membership. And I saw the absolute avoidance of political debate and the use of rules and protocols to avoid what would be the important debates that are in the interest of the working class. This boils down to essentially an abandonment of political education. They've done very much the same on anti-racist, anti-fascist campaigning. Trade unions have exported it, outsourced it by giving money to other groups rather than actually educating and engaging their members in that fight, with, again, some honourable exceptions. So I think there's a very big question about where does political education sit in the trade union and labour movement, and what can we do about that, and I'd be interested in any ideas. The second point I want to make is about, again, Jonathan is right about how the changing nature of the working class's economic relationship has had significant impacts. People who are working, having to leave home at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning and getting home at 6:30, 7 o'clock, feeling the kids are just, by the time they've done that, read the story to the kids, they collapse and they're finished. Those who are on 0 hours contracts, those who are unorganised by the trade union because they're too difficult to organise by the traditional trade union model. All of these are big, big questions. If we want to unify the working class, we need to tackle some of those issues, because that is the route through which we, again, have influence within the Labour Party and under Labour Party leadership. Without that activity, it won't happen. And finally, the other question, women. Every single debate around Brexit that I have seen, with very few exceptions, there's been a total absence of working class women. When they've been put up, they've been ridiculed and dismissed. And I think there is a specific approach for working class women that we need to engage in, because they are the marginalised group. So that working class men are either voted leave and are teetering because of where the Labour Party is. Women, some of them are going the same direction, or they're just staying out of it, in my experience, talking locally. But I think there is an approach we need to find, because it is the women who carry the brunt of the economic crisis, it's the women who are carrying the brunt of the consequences of austerity, and it is women who are suffering the consequences of all the cuts. So I think that there's a whole series of things we can do with messages, and I think smart messages, short, smart messages about realities would help. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruth. Anne?
Yeah, my name is Anne Field. I'm a retired trade union official and troublemaker. I don't think today is the time for a post-mortem. I feel that today is a time for invigorating our opposition to the European Union and to identify with workers up and down the country. So I think trips down memory lane, which we could all contribute to, will get us absolutely nowhere. And we've got plenty of time to read the Morning Star and all the other material that has been proliferating for the last 40 years and before. The message should be directed at workers, but we've got two battles, two areas that we have to fight. We can't deny that we have to find, if we can, some common ground on this question of the way in which these arch Tories are trying to manipulate Parliament.
Exactly.
We have to find common
Absolutely.
ground. If we don't, we're marginalising ourselves and we are not doing our people any favours.
Absolutely.
It's not good enough to say, oh, well, there's a battle going on over there, but we don't actually agree with it. Because we just make ourselves look stupid and we're not serving class interests. The second and more important battle is obviously to support our people. And our people are those people who have not had their circumstances improved by the European Union. End of story. Don't let's be namby-pamby about this. The European Union has not served the interests of the working class in any respect. It has been used on occasions to provide useful advances on discrimination, on some health and safety aspects, and the environment. But largely, those improvements have been temporary. Just ask anybody about the Working Time Directive, even if they know about it now. How many millions of workers signed their rights away? And yet we hear time after time after time, oh well, discrimination law, environment, etc., health and safety, it's all been improved for workers. No, it has not. And if you remember, during the dark days of the Thatcher period, we thought it was bad then, but it's going to get worse. Is we had all this stuff from the right wing, in the Labour movement, trade union leaders, and some Labour Party people, well, it'll be all right when the Labour government comes in. Will it help? It only got worse, it only continued. And the first thing that the Labour government said when the Tories were defeated, we're going to leave things as they are for 2 years. Do you remember the Tory budget? 2 years. So we have to keep the message simple for people, not because we're stupid, but because we're fed up with being sold the lies and the distortions of the capitalists. That's why people have voted in their millions against the European Union, because it hasn't served their purpose. It hasn't helped them. Yes, it's helped some people in service industries and finance and in research institutions, academia, funds from the European Union. Terrific. But where have those funds been to service all the jobs in manufacturing? What about the commercialisation requirement of all of the nationalised industries, etc., etc., etc. So the message has to be twofold. Keep it simple. We have to oppose and recognise why workers voted against the European Union and support them. We have to support that position of no EU and support the Labour Party in a general election. But we also, in the meantime, have to find some common ground. And just on a final point, I've not gone on a bit, but I feel very strongly about this because so many people have been involved in so many discussions with people. I have been called a racist. My views have been likened to that of a fascist.
Yep, I've had that.
And I'm sure that people in this room, that's happened as well.
Yeah.
But we have to have courage. We have to be prepared to stand up for our views and our beliefs and our faith in workers. That's the task. So, thank you. Let's hope that we can.
Did you want to contribute, Simon?
Sorry?
Did you want to say something,
May
Simon?
I?
Please do, and then we'll go to summing up. Yes, please.
Sorry, Simon Renton. I'm a member of the Communist Party. I was latterly
a university teacher and a union officer, but before that I have done proper jobs and driving buses and the like. So, sort of to try and follow on from what Anne's saying something and try and unpick this category of working people and suggest that there are differences. Class fractions have different views in a whole number of areas. Surveys done just after the referendum in 2016 showed that people who are in the socio-economic categories A and B, people who used to tend to think of as being pretty middle class or even upper middle class, overwhelmingly voted Remain. People in socio-economic classes C and D, semi-skilled and unskilled workers, especially those outside London, overwhelmingly voted Leave. That's not because they're stupid or because they're not educated. Yeah, people who are A's and B's probably are graduates. People in C's and D's mostly are not. That's not the reason. They're voting on the grounds of their perception of their economic interests. Jonathan White here, perfectly correctly, has pointed out that if you're operating in London, in the South East, if you're dealing with university teachers, they're in this culture economy which has thrived, or they think it's thrived, because of the EU. But until the Liberal Democrats were stupid enough to back the increase in university undergraduate fees, university and college union members overwhelmingly voted Lib Dem. They are not in the core of any way, and any sort of thing that I would define as a working class. And I say that as having been rather disappointed when I was president of the UCU for some time. Now, what I would say, sorry, I don't want to go on too long, is to say that we've got to try and unpick that. And it seems to me, if we've got any claim to be socialists, surely it's the interests of people in socio-economic classes C and D that we've got to be looking to.
No.
Those are the people who need to be with us, and we need to be with them to provide a more just, fairer society. And getting out of the EU is not going to provide that. But it is, as Mary Davis pointed out, a necessary step to get there. We've got to do this first. We've got to have control of our national economy so that it's returned to democratic control, so that then we can set to work to transform it, to make Britain a better place, particularly for poor people to live in. So thank you very much. Sorry if that was too long.
Okay, comrades, I think it's time to sum up. I'll ask each speaker, I'll give them 3 minutes to sort of pull things together and answer some of the points that were made. And then there's a couple of announcements. So, who wants to start? Andreas?
I have nothing to think.
Nothing?
It was a lovely conversation. Yeah. Honestly, I don't.
Tassos?
I will take a few minutes, so 3 minutes.
Please do.
Yeah, very, because...
You got a few more because he's saying nothing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please, thank you very much. There's always been a nice collaboration between Cyprus and... There were a lot of people here talking and asking, especially, I'm not remembering your name, you were talking about how the labor movement will go on, will move on. And what is being done here, like since also Margaret Thatcher crushed, let's say, the trade union. So my knowledge of history, of course, is not by any means close to what you have perceived all these years, but our experience from Greece, because we had not the same, we had a similar situation with PASOK, which was in the first times a liberal party, so to speak, which transformed a very strong and powerful labor movement in the 70s into a form of money exchange and working positions exchanged, and the people would vote, would contribute in the unions just because they would be given a job, or they would be given the opportunity to make extra money, and so on and so on. And they have flooded all unions. They really crushed everything. So what our initiative was as a Kukwe in the late 90s was to try and create our own pole into the union. So we founded PAME, which is the Greek front for action, if I can translate correctly. And this has worked out very well, because a lot of people, most of the people, if you ask the Greeks, they've lost every trust in the unions. They have most of them, like 50%, have no regard, especially the youth. But PAME has given a lot of people the idea again to go in to do something useful for themselves, so to start in this struggle, let's say. So it's not a question of what to do with this system so much, rather than how would you characterize your future perspective in a way that people would see a poll. You would see people clearly that defend their interests within the unions, and this is very important. And this cannot be done. I'm afraid I will disagree with some people who said today this cannot be done through a policy for Brexit, or this is something bigger. It will last decades probably if you recover from this situation. It's and you have to create also. I mean, it's always been a burden of the communists, of course, to go in this front and make this realization in the unions. So good luck from the.
Thank you.
From our experience, it's not easy. Don't be disappointed, and be again very very careful with whom you collaborate and what's your direction. This having a strong party, having a clear line in our experience is a million times more useful than having 100,000 members who don't have a clear perspective of what they want to do.
Absolutely. Well said.
I think I'm okay.
You're done.
Thanks for the invitation. Yep.
Maurice.
I think I'll stand. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up briefly on your question. Obviously, and this is contra Communist Party, but my politics is trying to connect with working class people around democracy and solidarity and economic renewal, and that does involve not being liberal, particularly. So I just want to explain to the room, really, it's a kind of hostility, fundamental hostility to the methodology in politics, or the anti-politics of liberalism, and it gets a bit hairy sometimes.
I'm sure
is what
As
I want
we
to.
know.
Yeah, it does get hairy sometimes, but I want to say that that's the only way I think we can move along, is to be able to defeat the Conservatives with genuine, and that's the really interesting thing that Simon, you mentioned, is that in academia, which is obviously a terrible place to be, I was told for 30 years that the working class were finished. They didn't matter. And the horror of our political moment for liberals is that working class people do matter a great deal. So I build my politics, I'm just letting you know that that's what I do in my politics. I'm prepared to take the loathing of the middle classes in doing that, although obviously I'm missing out on a lot of good meals. It's necessary price. And my takeaway from this, and it's been wonderful, is we've got to hold our position on this. It's the necessary condition of any politics. No deal and out the EU, and we've just got to hold the line inside our movement.
I think Mary has got lots to say.
Well, really the crucial issue, which is partly raised by Jonathan but also by others, is how do we win the unity of the working class? And I don't think we necessarily win that just over Brexit or the prorogation of Parliament. What we win it over is the interest that all people have got who sell their labour power to change society and change the basis of exploitation and oppression. Now, that doesn't mean, talking in general terms like that you can't recognise division. We have to recognise the division, but I don't recognise the divisions of the well, I call them sociological divisions, the ones, I'm sorry to mention this time, but the ones that I don't recognise those divisions. I think they're false. And I think if we just talk about, skilled, unskilled, all the rest of it, we're missing the point. The point is that everybody who sells their labour power for a wage, actually, even though they don't know it, have got an interest in changing the system. So the real issue for me, and I think for communists, is how do we combat false consciousness? And that's what we're faced with, is false consciousness. People who do not understand they might understand class in general terms, but don't understand their class position, don't want to understand their class position because they've been taught not to. They've been taught that this is a meritocratic society and everybody can achieve. And that's a complete illusion. So if we look at when the working class, or when the movement, a labour movement, was at its strength, the strongest, there's been various historical periods, but just looking at, say, the 1970s, what was the key to that? The fact that in 1974, it was the Labour movement that brought down a Tory government, the Heath government. Well, how do we explain the fact that the movement was so combative that it actually meant that sections, even the TUC, were adopting some of our policies? The key, in my opinion, was the strength of the left and the Communist Party. The Liaison Committee for the Defence of Trade Unions was critical to ensuring that in place of strife was defeated, that the Industrial Relations Act was defeated, and so on. So what then happened? This was the sort of golden age of the labour movement in a way. But that's what the Tories understood. That's what the ruling class knew they had to do. They had to smash it because that movement was strong enough to bring down governments, and it almost was. I actually made other parallels during the First World War. The strength of the labour movement then from 1910 to really till 1926, till the general strike, was massive. And again, it was because of the strength of the socialist left and the influence of the Russian Revolution and the lessons that people learned from that. So political consciousness is the key to combating false consciousness. Now that's not easy. That is not an easy thing. We can't just magic it, but it does mean that we need a greatly strengthened left which understands that there is a fundamental division in society, and not just between rich and poor, it's between capital and labour. And that's the key to it. Which is why the whole issue of the transformation of society, that's really what got people going in the last election, when Labour did very well, because they had a manifesto. It wasn't a socialist manifesto, it was Keynesian, but it was a manifesto that could open the road to socialism. Brexit gets in the way of that completely, and that's the tragedy that we have to face right now. So you ask a very important question. Somebody asked, what happens if the Conservatives win the election, which they might well do? The battle then is not going to be on Brexit, it's going to be to combat austerity and austerity politics and all of those things. And we could really see a revival in the Labour movement as a result of that. Of course we should support a no-deal Brexit, that is probably what we'll get, but we need to make use of that. Then the movement will have to be invigorated, but on the basis of fighting the economic policies which serve to keep capital in power and labour subordinate. So I think the question of building the left and having a clear concept of what the relationship between capital and labour is an understanding class politics is the critical thing for us to be clear about, so that we can be clear in fighting these battles ahead. And it will be difficult. You don't win unity by not recognising diversity, and the question of women comes into this into this too, because basically the basis of oppression of black people and women is based on class exploitation, and unless we can challenge class exploitation, we can't go forward. So we need to keep our theory very clear, and we always say, don't we, that, well, certainly we do in the Communist Party, that a Communist Party has to be guided by the most advanced theory, and the most advanced theory is Marxism, and that's what we have to learn, that's what we have to study, that's how we have to educate and organise and change things.
So we may have a general election, Labour might get elected, but the Tories might get elected, but la lotta continua. And the fight, la lotta continua, the fight against austerity is the key to our campaigning. I have here leaflets, Communist Party leaflets,